a good work in you will perfect it. Will carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. You are an unfinished work, not an undone work, simply unfinished. My daughter wanted to make a cake the other day, and so she got all of the ingredients together. And there's some strange things that happen in a cake. There are things that go together that you don't normally think about. They don't normally get along together. Your sister used a scripture last night that all things work together for the good of those who love God and those who are called according to his purpose. And I thought about that as my daughter was making her cake. 2 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, half a teaspoon of salt, a half a cup of butter softened, a cup of sugar, 3 eggs at room temperature, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, and 3/4 a cup of milk. Now, 2 cups of flour by itself does not make a cake. 2 teaspoons of baking powder does not make a cake. A half a teaspoon of salt by itself cannot make a cake. A half a cup of butter softened may not make a cake. A cup of sugar is not a cake. 3 egg whites, 3 eggs at room temperature is not a cake. 2 teaspoons of vanilla is not a cake. 3/4 cup of milk is not a cake. But when you put them all together and you put them in a bowl and you blend them together, you have what's called the cake batter. But the cake batter, hold up, is not the cake. Because you can set a batter on the counter all day long, and it will not be a cake. As a matter of fact, the longer it sits, the egg will begin to ferment and will ruin the batter. But it's not until the cake batter gets pushed into an oven at 350 degrees that something begins to happen to the molecular structure of the eggs and of the whites and all the sugar and of the extract. Something happens that the hotter it gets in the oven, things begin to lock arms, molecules change shape, and they begin to form together. And all of a sudden, when it reaches the right temperature, when it's in the fire long enough, Reverend, when you're in there long enough, see, the temptation is that when you look like the cake is done, to pull it out. But you got to take a toothpick and stick it in to see if it comes out dry. If it doesn't come out dry, then the cake is undone. But it stays in long enough. When the timer goes off, that's when you know that the cake is ready. Sometimes we go through life as nothing but batter, and we go through trials, and we want to come out. But God said, hold up, it ain't ready yet. Let it sit in the fire a little while longer. It's been 7 years. It ain't ready yet. But when God says, okay, time is up, here comes the cake. We are all God's unfinished work. We are all God's unfinished work. Being confident of this very thing, that he who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Jesus Christ. God's unfinished work. Mount Moriah, you are God's unfinished work. You are. God is not through with Mount Moriah yet. God is not through with Reverend Big John yet. You are all a part of God's unfinished work. There are souls that need to be saved in this community. There are lives that need to be changed in York. There's a work that God has called only Mount Moriah to do. Before God knew you, Mount Moriah, God formed you. And while you were in the incubator, God had already shaped you. And God had already appointed you to be a prophet to the nations. You are God's unfinished work. Your leader is God's unfinished work. Roll up your sleeves.